Good morning, everyone. If you're joining, just waiting a few minutes for attendees to come in. Thanks. Good morning and welcome to Seriti Talks. We are so grateful to have our panelists who will be presenting on the topic of the basics of monitoring and evaluation. In this first session, we will focus more on the monitoring aspects, and this will be a series of talks where we look at measuring impact and how we perform monitoring and evaluation to make sure that the work is done and we know what the results are. So I just introduce Seriti to the attendees to this webinar. Seriti Institute is a non-profit organization. We've been around for almost 14 years, and we have various programs in the agriculture space, early childhood development, strengthening civil society organizations, working with communities to respond to crisis needs, and then this platform, which is Seriti Talks, which enables people to come and share from the sector about issues relevant to nonprofits and also issues that we should discuss to ensure that we're making a bigger impact in the work of development. So we have various things that we support. We do program and project management, facilitated learning, and this, which is advocacy. And we capture ourselves as a development facilitation agency. And there are projects, and we welcome you to visit our website for more information. So thank you very much again. And with that, I am going to hand over to my colleague Mbeki, who will present on the basics of monitoring and evaluation. Thank you.
Thank you, Strawn, for that generous introduction. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining again. I'm going to share my screen now. Okay, today's, I hope you can hear me. Today's presentation is about the topic. Let me just put this on slide. So, right. Today's presentation is around the topic basics of monitoring and evaluation. The importance of monitoring project activities, outputs, and outcomes in community projects. As already indicated, our focus will be more on the monitoring aspect, as this is our first installment of this Seriti talk. I thought we might as well start by reminding one another about the importance of monitoring and how it can help organizations. I've tried to list some of them, it's not all, but we know that program management is topmost, which is more about the activities and the resourcing of projects. We also know that monitoring helps us to gather evidence and to use that evidence for ourselves to tell stories about the work that we do. And ultimately, the work that we do is supposed to shape government policy if we present it at the right places. Because if people can continue to implement projects and get lessons out of it, and then not share those, it becomes a lost opportunity. Now, on the issue of who's supposed to be using this monitoring information, I must say that usually there is a tendency to focus on funding partners and the program management teams, because they prepare those and quickly send them to funding partners. But I want to highlight that there is a lost opportunity sometimes for us to actually share this information with project participants, community members, and other stakeholders that we find in communities. Because if projects can come and go without using some of those lessons that we come across to help communities get better, it becomes a lost opportunity indeed. Now, this slide is a diagram and an illustration of M&E and the project cycle. So what is happening on this slide is that we have in green color, if I could use a pointer. So on the outside, we can see that the green boxes on the outside of this illustration are the project stages. So we start here with project design, followed by planning, and then project implementation, and then midterm evaluation before you end up with the actual end of project evaluation, where you generate a report, and then you have some information that you disseminate and share lessons. Now, what I wanted to highlight with this illustration is that at the same time as projects are in process, for example, with project design, the one thing that needs to happen before or simultaneously is the issue of needs assessment. With need assessments, this is the part where you go into a community and you understand the local conditions, you understand what challenges people are facing, and out of that exercise, you are able to develop your own theory of change. You are able to set up goals to say, because I now have an understanding of what the problem is, I'm now going to set goals. And when you set goals, as part of project design, it leads us to this space where we develop a log frame and indicators and assumptions that are associated with that particular log frame. The next stage that follows is project planning. Now, with project planning, you continue to flesh out on your log frame and add more detail so that you develop an M&E plan. Sometimes it's also called the indicator table or the indicator matrix, but here you get to define your indicators. You get to specify the frequency with which you're going to be collecting these. And then you also assign responsibilities to say, for this indicators, so and so is going to be responsible for this. And that is also using the M&E plan as a tool for planning as well as for implementation. Now, once you have indicators, the next thing that you do is your baseline. The baseline allows us to know the starting point. If we're going to make an intervention, we need to have a baseline. Where are we starting? And then once we make the intervention, or once we implement, we want to see how much difference we're going to make by having that implementation going and knowing where we started. So once implementation is started, we can see here the arrows are showing us here that there is ongoing project monitoring and reflection as you implement, but ultimately it leads us to either midterm evaluation or it leads us to end of project evaluation. And at the end of the project, what happens is that we have a report that shares information on the extent to which the project succeeded in attaining the goals, and also some lessons that are learned. If the project were to continue for another period, you use those lessons to sort of fit into your design. You make your design much better when you do the next cycle. Otherwise, that's how the M&E cycle as well as the project cycle is supposed to work. I'd like to, having spoken about the project cycle and M&E, I'd like to move on to results focus. I think increasingly our community organizations are asked to focus on results, and this diagram that I have here shows us the 5 components: the inputs, the activities, the outputs, and the outcomes, as well as the impacts. So what happens here is that if you are going to be assessing implementation operations, normally it's supposed to start from inputs up to this point here, which is outputs. Now, if you are focusing on the results, which is the assessment of results, it means you start here from the outputs all the way up to the impacts, right? And when it comes to the issue of budget monitoring is something that starts from beginning here, where we have the inputs, all the way up to the end here, where we have the impacts. And normally it's done by our finance departments, but they usually work in collaboration with the programs team so that better outcomes or results are actually obtained. Now, the risks and assumptions monitoring is something that again happens from the beginning when you put together the inputs all the way up to the end. Now, this particular slide tries to pick on the previous slide, or the diagram that was showing us the project cycle in M&E, but it tries to summarize the 4 main components of an M&E system. So the first part being the causal analysis, or the theory of change analysis. So if you're going to be, as a community organization, or just as an organization that is in development, if you want to build a robust M&E system, as much as possible, you try to make sure that you have those 4 components. And starting with the causal analysis, we have also the log frame, and then we have the indicator matrix. And then lastly, we have the data collection and analysis plan. So having said that, I'll take us to the first part, which is the causal analysis, or the theory of change analysis part. So as Seriti, we have a number of projects. And these projects, one of those projects is the Social Employment Fund project. And we've developed a theory of change. And the theory of change, in essence, to us is a comprehensive description or an illustration of what a particular intervention is supposed to bring about. So it can be written as a narrative, but in our case, we just chose to make it an illustration. As you can see, it's a very busy slide, but if we take time to understand it, it's something that can be easier to follow. So on this screen, we can see that there is two parts to the slide. There is this dotted line here in the middle. Just below this dotted line, we have the individual participants, and what they do is they provide labor and they get a stipend or an income out of the labor that they provide, leading us to I'd like to remove this one, leading us to the outcome will be that once you get a stipend, you are able to buy food, because this is one of the things that we focus on is food security, but we also want people to be able to figure out some recycling projects that they're able to do, or to start on farming projects. And then ultimately, people are supposed to be self-employed. Now, on the second pathway, we focus on the community, and when a group of participants come together, and the themes that we focus on is that of food production, waste management, and then also the awareness campaigns. But ultimately, the work that we do in this SAFE project is supposed to lead us to a position where we're able to achieve sustainable food production and improving food security. And also, because we focus on issues to do with nutrition awareness and improving food security and nutrition, and as well as waste management, we expect that there will be positive improvements with health as well. So that's a summary of what we do. Maybe important for me to highlight at this point that this project has got 4,200 participants, and we were implementing across 6 provinces. Now, this slide shows us a definition of what an input is, what activities, outputs, outcomes, and impacts. So outputs, I think I'll start with outputs. Outputs being the immediate and the direct results of activities that contribute to the objectives. And outcomes being changes that occur as a result of the outputs. It is normally in the short to medium term, and then impacts are the highest end results that we normally get from in our project. So I have an example here, which also draws from the theory of change, which I was showing before. On example 1 here, this is about training, how the training processes cascade. So you'll see that for training to happen, you're going to need inputs such as stationery, you need a venue, you need a projector or a laptop, and then you actually do the training, which is crop production. This will be an activity. The output, the immediate result is a completed training session or number of participants trained, and then outcomes are going to be the improved knowledge and skills. With that improved knowledge and skills, it is our expectation that there will be an improvement in food production practices and sustainable agriculture. Second example is the actual food production, because we're doing food security with SAFE. So if you are to produce food, what you need is seeds, you need manure, fertilizer, you need farming tools, water, and a lot of other inputs. And the activities range from preparing the soil, planting, applying the manure, and irrigating the land. The output will be vegetables produced, and you can measure those in bunches or in kilograms if you weigh them. And then the outcomes is that you are going to you will have improved food availability in the household as well as in the community. sometimes you might get an income if you're doing something extra outside what we do. Sometimes if you have enough, you can make vegetables for yourself and get an income out of it. And ultimately, would like to see food security situation improving. Now, this is just having talked about the log frame. I thought I must show that a log frame is supposed to have, besides making sure that you have your goals, your outcomes, your outputs, activities, and inputs, at least make sure that you have an indicator for each one of those. An indicator being the means for us to know that a particular outcome or output has been achieved. And then means of verification is about the method of measurement. It's also about where you're going to get this information that you have as indicators. And there are some assumptions, which is external factors that are associated with achieving a particular goal or an outcome. So those need to be highlighted from in a log frame. Now, I thought I'll stop at this point, maybe and allow somebody to take it further. But I thought those were some of the key things that I wanted to share and to highlight as part of the work that we do, and maybe hear from other colleagues in terms of the activity and the work that they do. Thank you. Thank you, Swan.
Thank you, Mbeki and Ndlovu, for that insightful presentation. And we can move over to Alana van Wouw from the IDC. Alana, if you would just give a brief information about yourself before you do your presentation. Thank you.
Okay, no problem. Hello, everybody. My name's Alana van Wouw, and I'm representing the IDC. So my presentation will be a little bit different because I have focused it on fundraising and more to the CEF program that we're actually running at the moment. So I'm just going to share my screen quickly and then we can move on. Sorry, it doesn't seem to be picking a presentation. Sorry, just give me 1 minute, please.
No problem.
Okay, I'm going to just try and share my screen this way. It doesn't pick up the PowerPoint. Can you see my presentation?
Yes, we can.
You can?
Yeah. Thank you, Alana.
Okay. So, all right, as I mentioned, if you can't see it or anything, because I can't see the group, I can only see my presentation. I'm not sure why it's doing that for me. But anyway, if there's anything that you can't hear, please give me a shout. I am in load shedding at the moment, and it might be a little bit cut off. Okay, so basically throughout this webinar, you hear M&E. And most of the time, a lot of people know what it is, have an idea what it is, but they're not really 100% sure. So I thought it would be a good idea as part of this webinar just to take a step back and recap on what it actually is, what it encompasses, and how it works, and how it helps you to raise funds. Okay, so monitoring and evaluation is the approach that we mainly use to measure, assess the success of projects, programs, or organizations. It all depends on the scope and the use. It's implemented by, in our case, the CEF project has got a number of people that come in, but On other projects, there's consultants, specialized organizations. Okay, monitoring and evaluation, even though they refer to the same aspect, they are two completely different views when you're looking at it from a fundraising perspective. And it's important that you make a decisive, clear view of the understanding of the two terms. Okay, monitoring basically refers to the measuring and documenting processes achieved and results. In the previous presentation, the achievements were lined out in a graph. Now that kind of fits into the main goal of monitoring, okay? It's all about collecting, using, reusing, learning from your data. Okay, as mentioned before, monitoring begins with planning of a project where the indicators are defined. The indicators are one of the key aspects when monitoring a project, because if your indicators are out, your planning will be out. Okay. Sorry. So basically, like I was saying at the minute, I'm not going to read the presentation step for step. It's on this thing and it can be shared. I'm just going to run through it. Okay. The whole point of looking at your process, your project planners, is to decide the approach that's worth repeating or upscaling. As you know, in our project that we're currently busy with, the SEF project, we're going on to round 2. And one of the key questions when asked the SIBs, what are you going to do different? Now, if your M&E is updated and you know what you're doing, then those results will already be there. You'll already have an idea of what can you do different? What should you do different? Okay, so I've put in a few little questions because it's come up within the DDs that I've done. A lot of people say, okay, well, they have a small operation. They can keep an eye on everything. They know what everything is, where everything is happening and how it is happening. Why do they need such a big system? Okay, so the question that I have to ask them is like, how many household members have each family had? How much income has come in? You see, it's small questions, but they have huge impact when you're looking at your project, when you're looking at reports, when you're looking at raising money. So it's not about the size of your M&E system. It's about the actual information which you are gaining from that project. Okay. So basically, like I've said now, when you're running a project, you have your project cycle, as we've discussed, and then you get to the end and you realize, oh no, you've made a mistake. Now, if you were monitoring it, then you would have picked this up halfway through the project and you would have been able to mitigate it. So the whole point of M&E is not just to monitor that you're achieving your little blocks, but it's also to make sure that there's governance, that there's clear indication for your staff, for consultants, for bigger projects that are coming in on the impact and the success of your actual project. Okay. In larger organizations, when it comes to fundraising, and I say larger organizations, it's basically any organization which consists of a board. They will ask you about your monitoring and evaluations, because that is key to when you do the due diligence and how they can motivate it to their board to get them to agree to a donation or a fund. Okay, so if you have a look at it, if you walk into a boardroom and you're presenting your company and you're presenting your project, if you can actually sit down and say, over the past year, we have achieved X, Y, and Z, which X has increased compared to the baseline study, and now we're repeating the project, or we're upscaling the project, or we've learned from lessons learned. You know, when investors sit down, everybody thinks that it's a matter of ticking a box. It's not. A lot of investors actually, and I've been in the investment side quite a bit, so I've been in a lot of due diligence and quite a few committees. But what they actually want to do is they want to know where your project is. What are you actually doing? What is the impact? So, you know, using your M&E data when actually sitting and raising money and asking for donations does come in very, very handy. Okay, so how does it actually work? How does M&E actually work? Okay, so I'm just going to unpack it. I'm not going to go into huge details. Okay, your performance measures. The performance measures is the tool that's used for monitoring and value that is very comprehensive. So basically, like I said just now, when you're sitting in a meeting with funders or if you're doing a brochure, your baseline value, the current situation and your target, what you want to achieve within the project is so important. Okay, and then depending on the duration of the project, your milestones, how are you going to get there? And how are you going to fund the gaps that you might have? Okay, creating the baseline. Like I've mentioned a few times about investment, if you have your project activities all put into the baseline study and you start monitoring from day one, this study becomes then the foundation that you build off, and the quality will determine on what your evaluation results are. So what you put in is basically what you're going to get out. Therefore, it's important that you consider the indicators and data that you're going to include into your baseline study. Okay, it is recommended at the beginning of the study to rather widen your scope, okay, than initially anticipated. The reason for that is due to the fact that when you start looking at a project, you see your baseline of how you're going to work and what's going to happen. But once you go into the field and you're actually standing in front of your participants, your group of people, you have all of these ideas that hit you before you actually even start doing the project. So rather take the time, expand it. You can always pull it back in. But the wider the scope, the better the results will be if from a monitoring perspective. Okay, like I said to you a few minutes ago, your indicators. The indicators are so key to the project. Okay, it establishes a set of matrix that you can control, but also that your shareholders and your investors and your donors can actually see the good work that you're doing and how you're doing it. Often a lot of SIBs that I've worked with, they give their indicators, they give their measurements, but they're not giving their success stories. And then when you go on a site visit, wow, here's all of these amazing stories and all of these successes that are happening on the ground. Your indicators need to absorb a lot of those stories, a lot of those successes. Okay, then the evaluation. This is a tricky one when it comes to most M&E reporting, is the evaluation. Why do we need it? Who needs it? Why do you need it? Okay, now the evaluation is just basically taking the full project cycle, organizations and everything that you've done, all your goals, and putting it into either a system or depending on what you work on. I know some of the SIBs have got some amazing Power BI programs that they're doing the evaluations and they're monitoring it. But if not, Excel, and it will give you the worth, okay, the costs and the outcome, and you will identify if it was either positive or negative. Was there cost efficiency on the analysis that was conducted? In other words, did you overspend? Did you underspend? And what the true performance is. Now, for the SEF project that we're doing at the moment, we're conducting a number of these little evaluations as we're doing the due diligences. So we'll look at round one and we will compare it to, like I said before, what's changed? What are we going to do better? How are we going to do it? So that is the whole reason that we look at that. Now, the impact measuring. Every time you sit in front of somebody that you're looking for a donor or you're looking for investment, the biggest question that comes up is impact measurement. How are you going to show it? How are you going to measure it? You know, it becomes very difficult in some projects because it's not straightforward. Okay, there are a number of impacts that might be small, might be in the background, and they are never brought to the light. So when you're doing your impact measurements, look at your indicators and if possible, put them into a clear-cut connection with the variables. That way, your database grows, and as your database grows, your impact measurements will grow with that, and then the outcome will be a lot higher and a lot more than if you had just put your few key points that was asked. Okay, so basically to end off my presentation, because I think I've taken a little bit more of the time, your M&E, when you go to funding and when you look at your brochures, you look at donors, what they want to know is, what are you doing? How are you doing it? And why are you doing it? And how much is it going to cost? And monitoring and evaluation systems give you that information at the tip of your hand, and it's easier for potential funders and donors to actually see that it is a tangible project. And with such a system, it shows development. It can be quickly identified and corrected if there's a problem. So if you look at the M&E from the previous two slides of how you set it up, each one will be different, because a system has to tie into your project. It has to align with your objectives as a company or as an NGO group. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alana, for that excellent information, especially from the point of view of donor funder organizations. And with that, I'd like to allow Talentus Mthunzi to provide his inputs on this topic of monitoring and evaluation. Thank you, Talentus.
Thank you so much, Struan. So as Struan has highlighted, my name is Talentus Mthunzi from Solidaridad, Southern Africa. I'm head of program development. I take care of monitoring and evaluation and business development. And I'm glad that the presentations that Mbeki and Alana have made actually show the complementarity of monitoring and evaluation and also business development from the collection of data that then feeds into the design of the program. So I'm going to reflect on some of the key points that were highlighted in the presentations that Mbeki made and Alana made as well, which I think are very important. I think what we also need to understand and appreciate is that monitoring and evaluation are two distinct components that are complementary in nature. As Mbeki highlighted in the presentation that he was making, so monitoring focuses mostly on collection of data and also analyzing the data to determine if the indicators in the results framework are making progress, or there are some areas within that particular project that are not making progress. But when you look at the evaluation component of it, the focus is more on assessing the impact that the program is making. And there are standards that are being utilized to actually assess impact. Most of the common ones are from the OECD standards, which actually highlight that when you are evaluating a program, from baseline, midline, and endline evaluation, which also touches on the impact evaluation that Alana touched on, the key areas of focus should actually be around the relevance of the intervention. Is the intervention relevant, or was the intervention relevant if it's an endline evaluation? How efficient were the resources for that particular program or project were being utilized to achieve the results of the program? And that leads to the element of effectiveness of the program, which is also part of the areas that need to be assessed. Effectiveness is closely related to impact, which is also a component that needs to be assessed, and also the element of sustainability. How sustainable is the project? So it's very essential that during the evaluation intervals, baseline, midline, and endline, and impact, those elements are actually assessed. The other element that is critical is to get buy-in from the program teams within the different organizations. Most of the times, monitoring and evaluation is seen as a component of the monitoring and evaluation unit. And sometimes the monitoring and evaluation team is viewed as a police mechanism for the projects, which is not the case. So we need to get buy-in from the project managers, the project officers, or the overall program teams, and also the leadership in the organization on the importance of monitoring and evaluation for it to be effective. It's not a component or a function that belongs to the monitoring and evaluation unit. It should be a component or a function that is seen as something that belongs to the whole organization, particularly the program teams. So it is essential that we get that particular buy-in and get the program teams and the rest of the senior managers, including the CEOs or the managing directors, to understand the importance of monitoring and evaluation. That enables the monitoring and evaluation function to be well-resourced when it comes to funding and human resources. And also, it ensures that the data and the lessons that are being learned from the monitoring and evaluation system are actually filtered into decision-making processes and also inform future program design. The other component that I picked from the presentation that Mbeki made had to do with the users of the M&E system or data that is generated by the M&E system. I think it is critical that we invest in ensuring that there are feedback mechanisms for the communities that we are serving. Most of the time, the data that is being collected only informs internal staff within organizations, but it is essential that we identify critical areas of interest from the communities that we are serving and provide them with feedback on how the project has actually made impact on the work that they are doing on the ground. It could be farmers, it could be the participants. In the case of the SAFE project that Mbeki and Alana were talking about. So those feedback mechanisms are really critical. Most of the times we just collect data from the communities that we are serving, but the feedback mechanisms towards the communities are sometimes not there. So it is critical that we invest in that particular component. Mbeki also talked about the design of the logical framework and the emphasis on monitoring the outcomes. The logical framework is an important component of actually setting up the measurement parameters for assessing the functionality of the theory of change and whether results are being achieved. I must point out that there has been a movement in the monitoring and evaluation space. So most of the M&E practitioners are now calling the logical framework the results framework to put emphasis on the results component or actually monitoring the results of the program. So it is therefore important to monitor the outcomes, but for us to monitor the outcomes, we then need to break down the outcomes into different components of outcomes, because outcomes come in different stages. So there are what we call immediate outcomes, which is the immediate changes that you see after you have implemented an intervention or an activity. It's actually in reference to some of the points that Mbeki was making in terms of the knowledge that has been accumulated if maybe the intervention was around training. So that's an immediate outcome that you see. The change in attitudes could be an immediate outcome that you see. And then you have a medium-term outcome it could be the application of the knowledge now, and the application of the change around the attitudes, which can be a medium-term outcome. And then we have long-term outcomes that could now look at the sustenance of the implementation of the knowledge that the different beneficiaries or communities have acquired, and then the impacts that really look at the high-level impacts like food security, for instance, sustained employment over time. And within that particular results chain, we also need to acknowledge that the span of control or the sphere of control for the project diminishes over time. So as you go towards the long-term outcomes or the medium-term outcomes and the impacts, the control of the project diminishes. So we have most of the controls at input, activities level, outputs, and probably immediate outcomes, and then up to maybe medium-term outcomes, but it diminishes over time. So we don't have much control. It's now up to the beneficiaries to adopt and implement the initiatives that we are deploying on the ground. I think what is also important is assessing the assumptions that Mbeki was talking about as we implement the projects. We need to understand that the context changes over time. So we really need to assess if our assumptions still hold in line with the theory of change that we had put together. And then the mechanisms for data collection also needs to be put in place. I see, Struan, I'm hoping that I've not gone over time. I see you've switched on your camera. Should I continue or I should stop now?
Perhaps you just wrap up and then we're going to open up for discussion. We've got a few questions that have come in.
Awesome, wonderful. So I think I just have two more points. The other one is on data collection. So we need to think about the mechanisms that we utilize for data collection. There's technology now that is coming to play. How do we take advantage of digital solutions, for instance, to collect real-time data, but put mechanisms for continuous learning and ensuring that we fully utilize the real-time data that is coming through. And also deliberately putting mechanisms to collect the success stories and also outcome harvesting mechanisms that could be put in place, and the lessons that we are learning, and being deliberate that the lessons that we are learning actually filter into future designs of our programs, which is talking to a point that Alana was talking about earlier on. I think I'll pause here for now. I think that was my reflection in terms of the presentation that Mbeki and Alana made. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Talentus. I think we've had a wonderful overview of M&E from the tools that we use to why it's important to ensuring that we get value for money, and also why we should be as enthusiastic about M&E as we are about the work itself. So we have some questions, and I'm going to go ladies first. So these questions I'm going to direct at Alana. We have a question that's, does the IDC follow up with projects that it's funded previously and look at the longer term impact? And another question, when applying for funds to extend a project or to expand a project, how important are the M&E results from the phase 1 of the project? Thanks.
Okay, so to answer the question, yes, I do believe that IDC do go back and actually look at long-term impact. I haven't been at IDC that long, but the time that I have been there, I have seen that we have actually gone back and had a look at one or two of the other projects that were presented in the beginning. With regards to M&E for round 2, based on what happened in round 1, it is critical. We definitely have a view of it, and we have a chat with regards to that, because you must understand that the IDC has a committee, an investment committee. And what we do as due diligence specialists, that's what I do at the IDC, we actually tell your story. So for us to motivate your funding requirements, for us to understand where you're going, you know, not all projects are successful to start with, but they have the bones to be successful. So it's a matter of understanding what the project's about, what did they do wrong in the previous round, or what can be made better in the next round. You know, it's communication. M&E is not just about data, it's also about communication. You know, from your participants to your SIPs, to your smaller SIPs, and all of that M&E data is brought into account when we actually go to committee. I hope I answered that.
No, that's great. Thanks, Alana. So another question from the audience, and I'm going to direct this at Mbeki. It's how important is the midline evaluation? And what happens if you get negative results? What should happen with the project? Over to you, Mbeki.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Strawn, for the question. The midline evaluation is somewhat of it's not always available in all projects, but for the projects that are able to do it, because it allows you to, once you are halfway through implementation, you get a chance. I think largely it has to do with budget, the way that I see it. People end up not doing it because of budget. But if you have an opportunity to do it, that's vital that you do a midline evaluation, because it gives you an idea on the extent to which you are managing to move closer to achieving the impact. Remember, as Talentus indicated, that the evaluation focuses more on the issues of effectiveness, to the extent to which you are moving closer to achieving your project. If you can figure it out earlier in your implementation, that there is something that's not moving in the right direction, it means you have an opportunity to take corrective action. You have an opportunity to reevaluate the pathway that you're following, and then you make sure that you adjust your team, or you adjust your implementation approach, so that you are more aligned and move much quicker to achieving the impact that you need. Thank you.
Thank you, Mbeki. And there was a question to the chat, which I will answer, whether we will go into more detail on other aspects of M&E in future talks. The answer is yes. This is the first part of a series on M&E. So if you have suggestions or aspects that you would like us to find panelists to speak to, then please put it in the chat. Any suggestions that you have, particular areas you'd like us to focus on in future Seriti talks. And then to continue with the questions for the panelists, we have a question which I want to direct at Talentus. What are the human capital elements of M&E and program evaluation, to specifically looking at the impact in terms of people's lives, the number of people's reached, and how do we know that the impact was positive? Over to you, Talentus. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Strawn. So I think what is important is setting up the monitoring framework from the onset and ascertaining what is going to show that particular progress. Most of the times, the indicators that we deal with are quantitative in nature. So we measure the number of, but it's also important that we look at the qualitative side of things. And in terms of the qualitative side of things, it's also highly dependent on the theory of change for that particular program. What did we want to achieve from the onset? As an example of the SAFE project, I think what we wanted to do was to create employment and ensure that people are getting some earnings from the work that they are doing on the ground. So in terms of success, we need to determine the number of participants that have been enrolled into the system and how long they've been sustained into that particular system. From a qualitative element, we need to see the change that is happening at the participant level. And for us to ascertain that change, we need to understand the areas that we are going to assess. So we focus at household level or at an individual level, for instance, in terms of the kind of change that the intervention has made. Has there been a positive response in terms of the attitude of that particular person? Have their confidence been built as a result of this particular initiative? Have they been exposed to other alternative income sources that they were not aware of initially, that they think they can venture into as a result of participating in these initiatives? And then we look at the income that they are getting. How much change is it making at their household level? Have they been able to buy food for their families and for themselves? Have they been able to send their children to school as a result of these earnings? So the parameters of assessing the change could be different based on the theory of change for that particular program. But we need to be deliberate in terms of the design of the program, that is particularly the theory of change of the program, and the measurement parameters that we are going to put in place that could be quantitative and also qualitative in nature. But I also wanted to reflect on the midline evaluation. I think there's a question that was not tackled. The other question was, what do we do if the results are negative? It is important that from the onset, when we design the programs, the design is based on evidence. I mean, the assumptions are put in place based on evidence. So our design needs to be informed by some sort of intelligence and evidence and facts from the onset. We do not anticipate that the theory of change should be overhauled at midline, but it's allowed for a theory of change to be adjusted based on evidence that is coming from the data that we are collecting in monitoring and also the midline evaluation. But from the onset, let's make sure that our design of the program is based on assumptions that are based on evidence. In some instances, you also need to do a formative evaluation to ascertain if what you are going to deploy on the ground is something that is going to work. The baseline can also assist in terms of testing the assumptions of the theory of change, so that you don't find yourself at midline doing an overhaul of the whole program. And yeah, that's a point that I wanted to raise as well. Thank you, Fra.
Thank you, Talentus. Just some comments from the audience. There's an interesting one. I think it speaks to the value of M&E as a way to develop our critical thinking. And someone says, shouldn't we maybe start with these concepts at school level, high school level? Maybe these kind of measuring techniques could be covered in mathematics or mathematical literacy. Interesting thought. And also, yes, presentations will be made available on our website, and this recording will be uploaded. I'd like to thank our speakers once again. And just a final question for all panelists would be, what kind of suggestions would you have for people wanting to improve their monitoring and evaluation framework, and in the most effective way, and also for looking at the longer term monitoring after a project is finished? Thanks.
Do you want me to start? Okay. I think the best advice that we can give in terms of M&E is to, I think, from time to time, you need to review your own capacity as organization to say, how much capacity do we have in our organization in terms of making sure that we do M&E correctly? And there has to be a willingness within the organization to say, we would like to do this. And sometimes when you try to engage in this exercise of integrating M&E in the work that you do, you might face some resistance here and there, but if you can have some champions within organizations, especially in management, who can actually see the value and explain it or articulate it in the right way so that everybody understands that much as some changes in organization might be required in order for you to make sure that you are better able to attend to M&E issues, it's the intention is to make your approach to be results aligned, as indicated earlier on by another speaker. So the best thing is you need to make sure that you find the skills that you need, which might be absent. If the skills are there, then we should make sure that we give people space to actually assist with implementing M&E approaches, so that we can always have an M&E plan for each project that is within an organization. I think if you have an M&E plan and it's properly done, it means you are assured of better results and better evaluation outcomes. Thank you.
Thank you, Mbeki. Alana, any closing thoughts?
Okay, I just want to add on to what Mbeki was saying. You know, when you're developing your M&E strategy, you're not alone. There are some amazing NGOs out there and groups out there that can help you, that can guide you through the process. And what I found that in M&E, if you want to do a successful project, you need to speak to your communities. They need to be the ones that are driving it, because they're going to do it. So the indicators will come out of those conversations, those workshops, because they are the ones that need the change, they want the change. So listen to them, get them involved. And then, like I said, networking. Networking is so key. If you're struggling a little bit, there's always somebody out there that has the knowledge that can help and share.
Thank you, Alana. Closing thoughts, Talentus?
Thanks. So I think one other important aspect is not falling into the trap of developing a lot of indicators to try and measure success. I think you need to be as focused as possible. Identify the strategic indicators that will tell the story about the project. The more indicators you have, the more resources you require to collect the data, and the more you are going to be spread too thin in terms of your analysis. But if you focus on strategic indicators that tell the story of the project and they are linked, then it enables you to really effectively monitor and evaluate your programs. Thank you.
Thank you, Talentus. And thank you once again to all three of our panelists. We really appreciate the time and effort that you took to join us. And thank you to all our attendees who also made the time to join us for this important session. Just like to encourage everyone, let's get out there measuring, making sure that we are making impact on the projects that we're doing. And stay tuned to our social media accounts for invitations to upcoming Seriti Talks events. Have a great day, everyone. Thank you.